The floor will be held at the conclusion of the meeting. Instructions for any individual who requests to speak on any matter discussed today have been posted on the front page of our website. I will ask Secretary Floss to take a roll call of the directors.
Thank you, Chair Olson. So Chair Olson.
Present.
Secretary Floss is present. Vice Chair Jurcek.
Present.
Director Sanfilippo. I know he was here, so we'll mark him present. Mayor Brown, ex officio, is Delano here? Yes. Thank you. County Executive polling cars.
Present.
Ben here? Yes. You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Fred.
Sure.
Our first item of business is to approve the minutes from BFSA September 21st, 2022 board meeting. Directors will find a draft of those minutes in the accompanying resolution in your board book under tab 2.
So moved.
I will second. Any additions, deletions, or changes? Hearing none. All in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We will now move to BFSA items. The Governance Committee met earlier today and has recommended board approval of the 2023 board meeting schedule, the 2023-2024 Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Goal Plan, and the 2023-2024 Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Business Development Goal Plan. The items are provided under tab 1 of your board book with the accompanying draft resolution under tab 3. A revised resolution on the MWBE goal plan was emailed to you earlier today. I will bring each item separately for a vote. May I have a motion to adopt the regular meeting schedule for the calendar year 2023?
So moved.
I'll second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, may I have a motion to approve the 2023-2024 Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Goal Plans?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, may I have a motion to approve the 2023-2024 Service Disabled Veterans Owned Business Development Goal Plan?
So moved.
I'll second that. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the next item is to review the mayor's recommended 2022 capital budget and related 2023-2027 5-year capital improvements program. The BFSA report on this item is included to you under tab 4, along with a copy of the mayor's plan. Bryce will review this information with us.
Good afternoon. Give me one moment and we will begin the presentation. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the board this afternoon. We're going to begin with a review of the 2023 capital budget. The first slide we have here is the capital budget broken out, projects broken out at a categorical level. So we have engineering, fire department, police department. So per the 2023 recommended capital budget, there's recommended total projects of 32.3 million, planned projects to be sold of 26 million, and 6.3 million to be authorized but unissued, which the city would plan on utilizing in a future year. This pie chart breaks out the 26 million that is being proposed to be borrowed for this year. Largest category is infrastructure at 9.2 million or 35%, followed by city buildings at 7.3 million or 28%, then followed by vehicles and safety equipment for the fire department at 4.1 million or 16%. And then economic development, culturals, and parks are both approximately $2 million investments, followed by demolitions and tree management at 1.5 million. The mayor's 2023 request includes 26 million in citywide projects, as well as an additional 6.3 million of previously authorized but unissued, for a total of 32.3 million. The mayor's requested that financing the amount of 26 million, consisting of 23 million in the new borrowing from the 2023 capital plan, and then 3 million from previously authorized but unissued amounts, for a total of 26. This year's comptroller's recommended limit for financing is $26 million. Total amount remaining of authorized but unissued projects of 15.6 million prior to the current proposed 22-23 capital budget. It's estimated would be at 18.9 million after the bond sale. There's approximately 400,000 provided for in the out years of the capital improvements plan of the authorized but unissued. The remaining balance of 18.5 million is provided for beyond the current plan. There also remains a total of 1.5 million in budgeted and unauthorized projects. The next chart we have here is a historical snapshot of the city's capital borrowing level since 2011. As a quick reference, the red is city borrowing, the blue are school district borrowings, and which has not occurred since 2012, since the school district's utilizing remaining JSCB refinancing proceeds. And then the green indicates years that the city issued a ban. So you can see last year the city borrowed for 22.9 million. This year the proposal is for 26 million. The next chart here is outstanding bond proceeds as of November 1st, 2022. The total is 19.1 million, which is a decrease of 3.7 million, I believe, from the prior year. Yeah, 3.7 million from the prior year, with 8.6 remaining from the 2022 issuance. So a few highlights. Once again, there are no projects again included in the district. It's estimated as of June 30th, 2022, the district has 23.5 million in remaining for capital projects. Bonding for ongoing general operations included 1 million for the tree removal and plantings, 500,000 for demolitions. That's a total of 1.5 million included in the proposed 2023 borrowing, which is 5.8% of total proposed capital borrowing for this year. And over the 5 years of the capital improvements plan, that is $2 million. We're recognizing a fiscal pressure, such projects will place if funded as a pay-as-you-go basis, but it's still recommended the city should consider that. The city has received an unprecedented amount of federal dollars through the ARPA federal relief plan. Approximately 154.9 million of those funds are targeted for capital investments. This chart here is a high-level snapshot, similar to what was provided last year, of the various capital investments through the ARPA funded projects. Couple highlights: 40 million for the Buffalo Sewer Authority, 20 million for the Buffalo Water Board, an investment of 16.3 million Affordable Housing Advancement Fund, as well as investments in parks and other culturals across the city. And at this point, I will turn it over to Jeanette.
Thank you, Bryce.
Can I ask a quick question, Janet, before you start?
Yes.
So do we know what interest rate the borrowing is occurring? And I think talking about risk management, as we see the Federal Reserve raising the federal funds rate, that we would expect the city in the out years to have to borrow at a higher rate. So I'm wondering what consideration we've had to interest rate risk of these projects, and is that why they're borrowing the maximum at this point And are they looking for projects that are going to last for multiple years where we're borrowing now at a lower interest rate?
So there's a lot in that question. So if I miss anything, let me know. And I think I saw someone from the controller's office hop on who might be able to, I think I saw Bill Ferguson who might be able to add comments on it. But the bond market, it's been volatile. Specifically the muni bond market, it was very advantageous for, it's been very advantageous for issuers this last, let's see, what are we in, December? So October would have been very advantageous, but then the curve, so to speak, started to go up. And while it's still advantageous, it's not as much so as it used to be. There's not a big drive for investors to buy this kind of paper, which obviously is going to impact the rates as it goes forward. Now, as in terms of, so I guess that there's that one part, we can't predict where interest rates are going to be at the point of sale. But all I can say is that based on current market conditions, I think it's reasonable to assume the volatility is going to continue through the point of sale. That would be the most prudent action, is to assume the volatility is going to continue. So there's that first aspect. The second aspect is there is no change in the city's approach for borrowing. They borrow up to the recommended debt cap limit annually, and that has not changed within this plan. They haven't reduced it, they haven't increased it. There's
Jeff,
that.
can I?
Yes.
Sorry. Can I just make an observation here, or at least ask the question? You know, notwithstanding all this federal rescue funding for capital and infrastructure improvements, and knowing that there's still a lot of, you know, unspent general obligation bond proceeds from the previous bond sales, you know, can someone from the city maybe answer whether or not, first of all, we may not even need a bond sale, a GO bond sale, you know, based on the city controller's, you know, recommendation. We're going, you know, $26 million. If the city doesn't have the capacity to spend all this federal revenue plus all the other unspent bond proceeds, I mean, I would think that they would put a moratorium on whether to issue more debt, regardless of what the new interest rates are going to be when the Fed meets again in January. I'm just wondering whether or not they have the ability to spend the funds they already have. You know, I mean, I would think that we would consider, not we don't have that authority, I don't think yet, but I would think it would be incumbent upon the administration, you know, especially the availability of contractors and supply chain issues and increased costs and so forth. Why would we even bother the city, or why would the city even bother to go to the bond market if they can't spend what they have? I mean, that's my observation, you know, just offhand, based on the analysis we've been looking at, and the fact that we do have millions of dollars of unspent bond proceeds from previous bond sales, plus the, you know, tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure, you know, ARPA funds for capital improvements, and also based on the tightness of the ability to even get these projects completed. I would think that going to the bond market would be something that they should forego if there isn't an ability to actually or a capacity to spend the money.
Fair question.
That's my perspective.
Delano Dow, just to respond to those concerns, we do an analysis, like the comptroller, her department do analysis as far as what the city can borrow. But even once she set that cap to what we can borrow, the city do DPW, offer OSP, finance. We do have meetings to discuss with directors and commissioners, can the city do these projects? So the ARPA money we received that Bryce just reported on, we know we have until 12/31/2026 to draw those funds. And we're fully aware as far as the need. The request to receive for this past bond sale was probably almost like 130 million in requests. We knew we only had $26 million to use in those requests. So we do our analysis and we do check and verify that we can do the work. And based off the departments we've worked with, they can do the work and get the work done. And even the money that was borrowed in prior years, it's a process, and the money's not going to spend and turned over within a year or so. It takes time, but we are looking to fund and finish the projects where we borrowed in the past, and as far as this new bond sale for 2023. So we're fully aware of what's out there and continue trying to work and get the projects complete within the city.
Delano, are your public works people having trouble that it's being recognized relative to, you know, available contractors and supply line or supply chain materials and so forth? I mean, are you guys having any trouble at all?
To my knowledge, no. We've met with Public Works. They're at the table during these discussions. They have mapped out which projects they plan on working on in fiscal year going to fiscal year 2023. And I mean, we know it's a lot of funding out there, so it's a lot of projects out there that need to be get done, a limited number of contractors and materials. But based off our conversations, they're comfortable being able to get the projects done. On top of the HUD money, the city received the ARPA money and the capital fund. The need is there, and based off conversations I've been part of, they do plan on getting the money drawn and spent.
Okay, no, I was just concerned as to whether or not you guys would be meeting, or would it be necessary to have another bond sale if you haven't already met the priorities from the previous bond sales?
That's like every year though, where we do have bond money carried over from year over year based off the contracts. I mean, we know it's going to take time, but the goal is to, if we have we fund the project, is to get the project complete and finished. But we understand the question, Andy, and council had a similar question also. But based off our analysis and our review is that the need is needed for the city, and we do plan on drawing the funds.
Yeah, well, the other factor that you're also in competition with other municipalities around both the county and the state and the nation to try to get their projects completed too. And I didn't know if you know, that has been restrictive in any way based on the fact that everybody's trying to race to the finish line to get their projects completed too.
No, definitely.
Hi,
Thank
it's Bill Ferguson. Just also want to add too, with any unspent bond proceeds, that normally goes to pay down debt service. It gets transferred to the debt service fund. So it's not, you really can't use previous bonded funds to pay for new projects because those were all committed to a certain project. So usually once it's determined that those funds can't be spent, that money is transferred to the debt service fund for debt payoff.
Well, I understand that. But when you got multi-millions of dollars still sitting there unspent, going to the bond market to be sometimes doesn't sound logical, at least from a financial standpoint. To be spending money on a borrowing, especially when your investment income doesn't match up to what you're paying. That's another concern too.
Well,
I understand the process where all, you know, whatever unspent bond proceeds there are, once the projects are completed, goes back to the debt service fund. I'm also concerned about the fact that you don't have any arbitrage, any ability to do that either, especially with the rates the way they are.
No, I mean, it's been the controller's office concern too, is that the money gets spent down quickly. It's currently, we don't want to issue bonds unless the funds can't be spent in a timely manner. And that's a concern that this office has always shared.
Yeah, and I got my controller hat on too, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Any other questions?
And I just have a couple comments on our recommendations on the report. Within the report, although it mirrors a lot of what we were just talking about. The first recommendation, all of these are consistent, by the way, with what we've said in past years. So our first recommendation has to do with the 5-year plan, how many projects have been approved but aren't not included in that 5-year plan from a financing perspective. And there's 18.9 million of projects that are carved out, they've been authorized, or they will be authorized, but they are not listed on the borrowing plan over the next 5 years. Of that 18.9, 400,000 has been included over the next 5 years. So that leaves a question mark as to how the 18.4 million of projects that have been identified as priority projects will be financed. And it's not just the selling of bonds. They could receive grants, they could receive some state aid for it, but at this time, it's a fairly significant amount that doesn't have a plan for how, you know, these projects are going to be paid for in the future. So our recommendation is the city plan out into the future how the projects will be financed to the extent possible. And it likely would require the plan, capital plan, to extend beyond the current 5-year plan. Additionally, we continue to advise the city to begin a process to eliminate the ongoing general operating expenses for tree removal, tree trimming, and demolitions from the capital borrowing. We say that annually. Next slide, please. Thank you. Speaking on the ARPA funds that Andy was talking about, we made that observation as well regarding the concern and the capacity of the city to disperse the funds by the established deadline. Funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, must be dispersed by December 31, 2026. We know their timing has already, not already, but has shifted with respect to getting some RFPs out there later than what was originally anticipated. So we recommend that the city establish strategic benchmarks for the completion of the work and have reviews against those benchmarks and revise the timetable as necessary to ensure to the best of the ability that there is timely completion of the projects that are funded by the ARPA dollars. And then the final recommendation is to strongly consider BFSA borrow debt on behalf of the city this year. Not only does the higher credit rating mean that we would have lower interest costs for the city of Buffalo, but due to the volatility in the market, it would provide an underlying mitigating risk factor to the city of Buffalo that would help insulate them from the strong impact of that volatility.
Any questions?
I don't think I included it on the notes for you, Nils, but if we could please take a vote to approve the recommendations, and I will forward those on to formally onto city officials.
Okay, is there a motion to formally approve the recommendations?
So moved.
I'll second. Any discussion? Has the city strongly considered leveraging the BFSA's higher credit rating? Do we know?
You guys cut out on me. Did you take the vote?
No,
Not
not
yet.
yet. I asked
Okay.
if the city has strongly considered leveraging the BFSA's higher credit rating. Jeanette, if you know.
Oh, to my knowledge, that has not shifted from where it stood last year, which is deemed not to benefit the city enough to do that.
Okay. It's good to know they're taking our recommendations seriously. Is there a motion to approve the recommendations?
So moved.
I'll second. Any other discussion? All in favor of approving the recommendation, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Has council tweaked this version, or do they tweak now?
They are in the process of reviewing and tweaking. Yeah, so they're required by December 15th to.
Oh, the 15th, yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yes, you said that. And will council, when they launch their tweak, will they have access to our recommendations?
I will say, I will mail their offices, the items. Yes, I will.
do you expect any formal response to our recommendations? Jeanette?
I don't typically get formal responses. I do, I could certainly add it on the agenda to follow up and have I think it'd be worthwhile to have a conversation with the controller's office and see where their heads are in terms of, what their financial advisor is talking to them about. But I think we know where, a common council has been the authority that has not wanted to move forward on this.
Right.
Yeah.
Have they given a reason?
They did give a reason. They indicated that our bonds are paid in 2025. And at that point, they would like to advocate for a change in the BFSA Act to early terminate the BFSA.
It's good to know we're still held in high esteem by the city.
I'd like
Do
to
we
come
know,
back to the,
do we know what the differences would be in terms of leveraging the higher credit rating, especially during this time of enormous volatility?
At this time, I don't have that. I don't have the information to be able to run that analysis. So based on the final tweaks that the common council does on the plan, then the data is pulled together. So we have an idea of how much the projects are, when they have to be paid by, like the number of years each project has to be paid by. We could stream that onto a schedule and then do an analysis of what the difference could be based on market conditions. So I probably told you more than you needed to know, but that is certainly on the agenda. I start talking to the controller's office about getting that data, usually by the end of December, early January.
I think that'd be very helpful. We've not traditionally held as many meetings with the controller's office. I think it would be useful on, particularly in these very volatile and uncertain times, to have a conversation with them as well.
Agreed.
parallel to communicating with the comptroller, I come back to my question about council. And when they, my choice of words before was when they begin their tweak, and Jeanette, you said you'll alert them. Is them, in this case, the whole of council, or is there, wasn't there an energized budget committee back when cash ran out during the epidemic? Who do we talk to in council when we have very specific recommendations such as we have right here?
This is probably one of the more unique recommendations in that it involves common council approval ultimately. Most of our
Right.
recommendations would be directly to, the controller's office or to the administration. So for this one in particular, we mail the letter in the report to all council members.
Okay,
And we've been having more conversations with the finance committee over the past number of months.
all right,
So this is certainly something I could put on our discussion agenda and talk to them about.
all right. All right,
I guess it's good to know that perhaps by 2025, we'll begin the process of replacing members just in time for the city council to address our continuing existence. I hope it's not too much of a cost for them to continue along this path. I guess I'll leave it at that.
I have a schedule.
I'm sad to hear that we can't have meaningful discussions about anything other than pulling the plug on our future. If there is the possibility to have more useful discussions with the council and its finance committee, I think that would be helpful, if it's possible.
I do have to say that I think that we've had some very productive discussions with council about a number of issues that I think have been helpful for them going
Okay.
forward. So I would look forward to having another meeting with them and working with them on a number of issues, not just this issue with the bonds, but a number of other things to deal with the budget. So I think we've had some very productive discussions, quite frankly.
Okay, that went beyond the
Yeah.
total extinction of the BFSA. That's just me editorializing. It doesn't have to be answered. I just think it's unfortunate that we continue to find ourselves in the situation of juggling the future of the BFSA with the future economic conditions in the city. I do think we've helped in the past and could continue to help. Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay, we'll move into the review of financial operations as reported by officials of the city of Buffalo. These include a review of police arbitration award and its fiscal impact, the 2022 audited financial statements, and the first quarter report. For our record, the city's 2022 audited financial statements were submitted on November 23rd, 2022. Bryce, would you please discuss these items with us?
Yes, Chair Olson, thank you. We will begin with a review of the city's the arbitration award between the City of Buffalo and the Police Benevolent Association. Little background, the PBA and the city were out of contract between July 1st, 2019 through July 1st, 2022. The arbitration award was released on July 28th, 2022, and it included 2 years of retroactive increases of 3% on July 1, 2019, and 3.2% on July 1st, 2020. The impact of the arbitration award affects multiple years, including the most recently finished year, fiscal year 22, as well as the current year, fiscal year 22, 23, and the 3 out years of the current financial plan. The PBA and the city are currently out of contract as of July 1, 22 in the current fiscal year. So what we have here is a breakout of the impact of the arbitration award for cost on a retro basis, current fiscal year, and 3 out years, as well as the FICA and pension contribution amounts, and then the total cost. The retro impact for years July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2022 was 10.9 million for the arbitration award, approximately 3.4 million for FICA and pension contributions, for a total of 14.2 million. The city did accrue for those first 2 years at a 2%, so they had approximately 5.3 million available towards that amount. At the end of fiscal year 22, they utilized 8.9 million resources to address the remaining variance of that 14.2 million, to basically make the city whole up through the end of fiscal year 22. Keep in mind, the city is still out of contract with the PBA for that year as well as the current year. Current year costs will be funded through available budget resources that have been identified. Resources to fund the arbitration increases in the out years have yet to be identified. So that was the arbitration award. At this point, I'm going to move into the review of the city's 2022 audited financial statements. The first schedule we have here compares the adopted budget, final budget amount, and actuals, as well as encumbrances for revenues and other financing sources, as well as expenditures and other financing resources. Overall revenue, actual revenue was approximately 548 million. Total expenditures excluding the encumbrances is 527.3 million, with a surplus of 20.8 million. Next slide we have here is a year-to-year comparison of total revenues, including other financing resources. Year-to-year revenue increased by 15.6 million, 14.3, excuse me, due to operating revenues of 1.3 million from other financing sources, which were transfers in. Significant changes can be summarized as follows. Intergovernmental revenue increased by 5.5 million. That includes 39 million increase in the tribal state compact funds. That was a largely a one-time payment for the back amounts owed to the city. 24.6 million decrease in the American Recovery Plan Act funds. A 19.7 million decrease in New York State aid and incentives to municipalities. And there was a 9.7 million increase in sales tax collection. I just want to point out the decrease in AIM was a one-time correction to address the reduction in AIM from the state 2 years ago when the city was made whole last year. So now the city is receiving AIM at their standard rate of approximately 161.3 million. Tax revenues increased by 4 million. 3.7 million that was attributed to the mortgage tax. Miscellaneous revenue increased by 2.9 million. This included 800,000 for the sale of land and buildings. Miscellaneous other increased by 1.4 million, and all other miscellaneous had a net increase of 700,000. All other remaining revenue sources had a net increase of 1.9 million. Now for transfers in the other financing sources, they increased by 1.3 million. 900,000 was for the increase for the parking enterprise fund. It came in higher than was originally expected, and then $400,000 increase for the transfer from the water enterprise fund. Next slide we have here is the historical property tax levy going back to fiscal year 2012 when the levy was at 143.3 million. You can see how it was reduced between 2013 through 2019 or 2018, and then began increasing to where it was at 147.2 million this past year. So really that was an increase of less than 4 million in the property tax levy over this 10-year period. One second, froze on me. Next slide we have here is the historical sales tax revenue between fiscal year 2012 when it was 71.8 million. You see that it's increased to 107 million at year end 2022. So it's an increase of roughly $35.2 million over the last 10 years. Significant increases over the last 3 years. This is our state aim only. As you can see, it's 161.3 million. This is what I referred to earlier when there was the correction in state aim. There was a decrease, increase, and then just the back to where it was previously. Moving on to expenditures. Total expenditures increased by 9.6 million year to year. You'll see as follows. Departmental expenditures increased 32.2 million. 20.1 million was for public safety. Now that's going to include expenditures for the settlement with the Police Benevolent Association, as I mentioned in our earlier part of the presentation, as well as overage in fire and police overtime. General government support increased by 8.3 million. Street and sanitation increased by 3.2 million. Now, these increases were offset by some significant decreases. There was a decrease of 26.4 million under general charges. Significant piece there was the debt service decrease of 25.2 million, as the city repaid the deficit note of principal of 24.3 million in fiscal year 21. This payment did not occur in fiscal year 22, so there's that decrease, as well as 900,000 for interest and fiscal charges associated with that. The other decreased by 4.7 million. This is associated with prior year judgment and claim payments. Those payments were higher in fiscal year 21 and significantly came in significantly lower in fiscal year 22. And then fringe benefits year to year increased by 3.5 million. There was a 3.5 million increase for pension contributions, and then an increase of 3 million for health insurance costs, which was offset by a net decrease of 3 million in all other fringe benefit areas. And then the interfunds transfer out increased by 3.8 million for debt service. Next slide we have here is going back to fiscal year 23, historical actual to budget. The darker green is the actual, whereas the lighter blue is the final budget amount. As you can see, the last 2 years, actuals have exceeded final budget amounts, which was not the case over the previous 8 years. So there was a total favorable variance of 9.2 million from final budget to actual budget, 6.8 million under operating revenues, and then 2.4 million under other financing sources. The 6.8 million can be broken out in the following. There was a 10.7 million favorable variance in our government revenue, including a sales tax over budget by 20.5 million, federal aid under budget by 30.7 million, and then the casino revenue over budget by 21.1 million. There was also a 3.8 million favorable variance in property taxes and 2.2 million favorable variance in non-property taxes. 2.2 million favorable variance in licenses and permits as well. These favorable variances were offset by a 10.3 million unfavorable variance in miscellaneous revenue. That variance was driven by 5 million due to the sale of buildings and land that did not occur, and then approximately 4.7 million in multiple grant reimbursements. There was also 1.9 million unfavorable variance in service charges. There was a 2.4 million favorable variance from transfers in from the parking enterprise fund. And this chart here is a historical snapshot of actuals, which are in red, compared to the final budget amounts, which are in blue. As you can see, this past year, the city came in under budget. Historically, have been able to do that for the most part. Favorable expenditure, for fiscal year 21-22, the favorable variance for budgeted appropriations was 7.8 million. So there was 13.2 million unfavorable variance in the police department for the payment of PBA arbitration award and overtime. There was a 2.6 million unfavorable variance in the fire department attributed to overtime. Under fringe benefits, there was a 12.8 million favorable variance, mainly tied to health insurance favorable for retirees at 5.2 million, and then active employees was favorable by 4.2 million. And then there was a 10.8 million favorable variance in all of their departments, largely due to vacancies as well as a decrease in expenditures for supplies and services that year. Moving on to fund balance. Year to year, fund balance has increased by $20.8 million from 104.3 to 125.1. Largest increase was under unassigned at 15.8 million, followed by non-spendable restricted at 3.8 million, and then assigned went up 700,000 and committed went up 500,000 as well. Now, under non-spendable restricted, there was an increase of 3.3 million attributed to the refuse fund. So you see that 15.7 million capital outlay increased by 1.5 million. Those increases were offset by a decrease in the real estate acquired for resale by 200,000, and then a decrease of 900,000 in emergency medical services. So at year end, non-spendable restricted had increased by a total of 3.7 million to 42.4. The committed fund balance, that is at 41.1 million, or it's the emergency stabilization. It's the rainy day fund. That's increased year to year. And it's equal to 30 days of prior fiscal year's total general fund operating expenditures. Moving on, assigned funds. These are funds that are segregated for specific purposes. Year to year, those increased by 700,000, and that's attributed to the encumbrances at 11.7 million. We had the unrestricted and total fund balance historical going back to fiscal year 23, when total fund balance was at 36 million, compared to 125 million current year end. And of that, there's 82.7 million that is unrestricted fund balance in the current year, compared to 26.7 million in fiscal year 2013. OPEB. There was a slight decrease in OPEB based on the actual valuation, compared to when it was first measured back in fiscal year, or back in 2006-7 at 946 million. It's been an increase of 38.6%, compared to the high point of 1.6 billion. That's been a decrease of almost 20% for the OPEB liability. Moving on to the solid waste and recycling fund. There was a operating loss this year in the refuse fund in the amount of approximately $200,000. As you saw, they had 3 years of operating income, but actions not taken by council to increase the rate in the current year budget will probably transfer to another year of operating loss in the current fiscal year. Long-term and receivables. So with the operating loss in the refuse fund and other costs, long-term receivables is 15.7 million. This is under non-spendable fund balance. That 15.7 million is due to the general fund. City was at a high of 19.5 million in fiscal year 2018. It was actually made progress on paying it back to the general fund and was down to 12.4 before the increase of 3.3 million this year. So that took us through the financial statements, and I'm going to move on to the city's first quarter report. At the end of the first quarter, the city is projecting a year-end surplus of 5.1 million, 3.3 million favorable in revenues, and a 1.8 million favorable in expenditures. This is just a high-level snapshot of the various revenue sources that the city reports on. So total revenue projection is favorable by 3.3 million. 3.4 million of that's projected favorable budget variance in intergovernmental revenue. 3.1 of that is attributed to increased sales tax collections compared to the adopted budget amount. The next slide we have here are the intergovernmental revenues showing state aim, 161.3 million. Sales tax seeing significant increase there between the adopted budget amount and the year-end actuals for fiscal year 22, but then also the 3.1 million year-end increase for the current year. Casino revenue, the federal ARPA funds as well. So the only real change there is attributed to the sales tax. In regards to the American Rescue Plan Act funds, through June 30, 2022, approximately 55.4 million has been dispersed. 51 million of that through the revenue replacement, and then all the other programs, including the Mayor's Summer Youth Program, investments in cybersecurity and other capital assets for 4.4 million. High-level snapshot of departmental expenditures. In total, it's a favorable year-end projection of 1.8 million. However, at the departmental level, it's unfavorable at 1.8 million. And then under general charges, it's favorable by 3.6 million. So it's a net favorable position of 1.8. Under departmental expenditures, the 1.8 is driven by unfavorable variance is driven by the following pieces. Police department projected to exceed the adopted budget by $3 million. Fire department is projected to exceed the adopted budget by 1.5 million. And then the remaining departments are projected to have favorable budget variance of 2.7 million to offset the 4.5 million overages in the public safety areas. Now, moving on to general charges, there's a 3.6 million favorable variance in general charges. 2.9 million of that variance is in fringe benefits and personal services. That includes a current projected 4.7 million favorable variance in health insurance, and that would be netted against a 2.1 million unfavorable variance in all other fringe benefits. There's also a favorable 300,000 in utilities and 400,000 favorable variance in all their general charges, and there is no projected variance with transfers out. As of September 30th, 2022, the city had a vacancy rate of 12.8%, 352 vacant positions. That can be further broken down to 67 vacancies within the police department and 60 vacancies within the fire department specifically. The city, at the end of the first quarter, the city is projecting a year-end surplus of 5.1 million. This projection includes the use of 51.8 million in ARPA funds. However, it is early in the year, and subsequent events could have a significant impact on the city's operations, as well as the city is not projecting any budgetary difficulties for fiscal year 22-23. And that brings me to the end of the financial review of the city.
Any questions or comments?
Yes, of the 52 million of ARPA money moving in and out. That's a projection for the year. That's not, those aren't first quarter data. That's data. That's for the year, right, Bryce?
Are you referring to this one?
Yes. So
this one,
go on.
this
First as of, okay. Okay.
Yeah, and currently there's 51.8 million included in the budget. But if other revenues keep coming in stronger, that number may be adjusted downward, similar to how the city adjusted it downward in the previous fiscal year due to the increase in sales tax as well as the tribal state compact dollars being received.
Sure. But overwhelmingly, of the 51.8 million, that's revenue replacement. And I think your number was 5 million was non-revenue replacement, such as infrastructure, right?
Are you referring?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, the final city item is a consideration of a resolution related to the City of Buffalo's 2023-2026 financial plan. The resolution notes that the necessary modifications to the city recovery plan, which predicted the contingent approval of a 4-year financial plan, remains open, and the financial plan is subsequently found to be out of balance. The resolution requires the mayor to submit a revised City of Buffalo recovery plan or other planned actions to balance the financial plan. The submission is required no later than January 20th, 2023, which is a slight extension from what was emailed earlier to you today. May I please have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
I'll second that. Any comments or discussion?
Delano Dow, we have been in contact with the BFSA, and Jeanette and her team has been very helpful in letting us know what's needed in regards to the amount of lost revenue reported in the spending plan that's submitted to the Department of Treasury, and then what's the amount of lost revenue reported in the city's 4-year plan. The administration will work with the Common Council on rectifying and see the correct amount of lost revenue that will be used during the 4-year plan to make sure it matches up to the amount on the spending plan that reported to the Treasury. So I want to thank Jeanette for continuing to stay on me since I came on, letting me know that we need to take care of this, and the city we will have a response to this group by January 16th.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to district items. There are 2 matters that Nathan Miller will report on today, including the fiscal year.
Charleston,
Yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
am I jumping
Was
ahead
a,
again?
was a vote taken on that resolution? I don't think we took a
I
vote.
don't think it was. No, thank you for
That-
reminding me.
No, that's okay.
Okay, hearing no discussion. All in favor of the resolution, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, now we'll move on to district items. Nathan will report on today, including the fiscal year end audited financial statements and first quarter review. Nathan, could you please begin?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. The following is a brief review of the Buffalo City School District's fiscal year end 2022 financial results. I'll provide this, and then I'll provide a review of the district's current fiscal year first quarter results following this presentation. The following depicts the fiscal year end 2022 actual results as compared to the final budget. Total revenues and operating transfers in were unfavorable by $4 million. Total expenditures and other financing uses were favorable by $50.5 million. And overall, the final budget had a deficit of $34.6 million. There was an actual surplus of 11.9 for a favorable variance of $46.5 million. And I'll take a deeper dive into those numbers momentarily here. Well, for starters, there was a slight variance from the final budget to the actual for fiscal year end 2022 revenues. Revenues were unfavorable by $4 million overall. Some of the variances here were local sources were favorable by $12.8 million, including Erie County sales tax receipts by $8.9 million. This was more than offset by New York State aid, which was unfavorable by $16.7 million. And this slide breaks down the major areas where the variances occurred.
Nathan, can you explain the state foundation aid? I mean, with the budget and the discussion of the increase in foundation aid and fully funding foundation aid, is this a one-time miscalculation by the district? Is this the state not fulfilling the obligation that seems to have been in the budget? And what does this say going forward for estimation of state aid?
Sure. This number was based on the number provided by NYSED for the legislative budget. And when the budget's passed, it's based on earlier data. It's based on the mid-November Beds Day data. So this foundation aid is unfavorable by $2 million. It's really just an adjustment based on the formula and more up-to-date data. So it doesn't mean that they weren't fulfilling what was in the budget. It's just an adjustment.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions?
I have wanted to move on to the expenditures here. This is
Okay.
where you see a much larger swing. The expenditure, this table shows the fiscal year end 2022 actual expenditure results as compared to the final budget. So I noticed it was about $46.5 million unfavorable overall. The biggest variances there were within instruction for regular school, overall $26.7 million unfavorable. And then there are some other significant categories below that, being general support, 12.1, employee benefits close to 9 million, and then there's a slight variance with public transportation. So this table here depicts the change in total general fund balance from fiscal year end 2021 to 2022. You can see that the $11.9 million actual surplus is factored in. Fund balance totaled $324.6 million at fiscal year end 2022. That's the highest level on record. And the next slide will break out how assigned fund balance is filled and how it's changed. So total assigned fund balance increased $7.6 million. Overall, it's 187.7 at June 30th, 2022. Some of the pots of money I wanted to point out were that they even though they didn't change quite a bit, OPEB assigned for OPEB is 70 million, and it went up slightly from the prior fiscal year. And there's this other pot of money assigned for it's called American Rescue Plan continuation. And this is a category of assigned fund balance that should the district choose to use it once that ARPA dollar, the grant funds are drawn down, should the district decide to continue all some of those programs, this pot of money would be available. It's been set aside to help fund that. I wanted to point those out because they're fairly large. And then the final slide here just gives a 10-year historical OPEB. You can see it fluctuates quite a bit. The final amount here at June 30th, 2022 is $1.7 billion, well, let's just say 1,733.2 million. This is a decrease from the estimate from the prior fiscal year of 752.3 million. And the biggest reasons why were there were differences between the expected and the actual experience, and then a series of changes in the assumptions, including the discount rate and a lot of the other inputs Some of this is the impact of recently settled CBAs that have long-term benefits on OPEB as well. I went through that fairly quickly. Were there any additional questions today before I moved on to the first quarter results? Okay. I shall pull up that slide, those slides rather. We're just verifying that people can see the slide because I've got some lag going on here.
Nope. Says end of slideshow.
Yeah. I shall do that again. Better?
Yes,
Nope, back to the,
now back, yep,
back
for
to
one
a
second.
black screen.
Third time's the charm here.
Mm.
Okay, it says I'm sharing. Can everyone see this?
Yes,
Yes,
Great, great. There we go. They go from the beginning. Now it disappeared.
you might want to just show us without hitting the slideshow.
Yeah. I'll do that.
You can make it a little bit bigger if you want down at the bottom. We could see it a little bit better.
Will do.
Okay.
That's too big, but let's see. Okay. So for starters, a lot has happened since the start of the new year, and I wanted to go through some of the biggest events real quickly here. Back in July, the Board of Ed appointed Dr. Tanja Williams as the new superintendent. Following that, in August, the Board of Education approved several exempt employee salary adjustments and an exempt raise proposal. This was later amended on August 31st. And we just went through the presentation, but the Board of Education received its audited financial statements back on October 19th, 2022. Additionally, between June 22nd and February 21st, the Board of Ed ratified 4 labor agreements. The first of which was with PECTA, the white collar employees and security officers. BFSA reviewed and estimated that had a $1.3 million current fiscal year net cost to the general fund. The next one was with BCSA, the unionized administrators. BFSA estimated the current fiscal year cost at $3.7 million. With the AFSCME cook managers, had a $100,000 current fiscal year cost to the food service fund solely, did not impact the general fund. And then finally, at our September 21st board meeting, we reviewed the operating engineers labor agreement. BFSA estimated that one had a $4.3 million current fiscal year net cost. Now, at a recent Board of Ed Finance and Operations Working Group, they indicated that a revised 2023-26 financial plan would be submitted to the full Board of Education at some upcoming meeting. Well, is something that we're tracking, and I will certainly follow up on that. Additional events that occurred during the first quarter, the district experienced labor shortages in some pretty critical areas, including transportation. There's a shortage of bus drivers, and even though these are not district employees, they're first student employees. The district contracts with first student, and it has impacted the district quite a bit as far as getting kids to and from school. There's also a shortage with the bus aides. Within transportation, there's a shortage of teachers, building management, we just reviewed the contract for operating engineers. There's a pretty significant vacancy rate with that group and also within the exempt employees. So this table here gives the overall level of budgeted and projected revenues and expenditures. The budget was adopted with a $34.6 million deficit. The district isn't projecting anything radically different from that. It's a $2 million favorable variance at fiscal year end, with $1 million favorable variances with both revenues and expenditures projected. With the revenues, the only area here that where a variance is projected is within sales tax, projected at favorable at $1 million. This is an area that's typically under budgeted, underestimated by the district. It hasn't been less than budget probably since the Great Recession. So for a good at least a decade, the actual amount exceeds the budgeted amount. And the state aid here, I'm pointing it out because there is no variance currently projected, but BFSA does anticipate that an unfavorable variance will occur based on more up-to-date data. What that number is, we don't know yet. I'm trying to get that number from NICID or from the district, but it is based on what we know now versus what was budgeted. It does seem like there will be some variance because of the current enrollment.
Nathan, I'm sorry, exactly at this point, this question, budgetary variance as driven by total head count, customer count, student count. When is their census date? The one that is binding for the state of New York?
So there's a few, we're probably referring to what's called Beds Day. And the acronym, what it stands for escapes me at the moment, but that's I believe it's mid, I don't know the exact date. It was probably about a month ago, and it's when the districts report to the state education department. Yeah,
sort of mid-fall, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Both district public students within the district and also public students within area charter schools are both less than what had been anticipated, and so that will impact a number of aids, most significantly probably foundation aid.
You know, I just didn't hear you acoustically. You said the head count hard numbers will probably be lower for the district and the charters. Is that what you said?
The current, so if you look at September 30th, the total number of enrollees is lower for combined in all the charters and as well within the district. Both numbers are lower than what the district has in its adopted budget. They're both under what the budget amount was.
Now they know that, of course, but do we have the amount of variance between projected and actual?
I do. It's within my report. I don't know the number.
Okay,
but I can certainly follow up with that.
all right. Thank
Charter
you.
school enrollment did increase overall, just not nearly as much as what had been projected originally. District enrollment is like an actual number is actually down from the prior fiscal year.
Is that due to dropouts?
I wouldn't think so at this early. It's more like early enrollment. And I'm comparing fiscal year end or school year end compared with first quarter enrollments too. So that the prior year's dropouts were factored in at that point. Yeah. Probably certainly some of it would be, but I wouldn't think, I think it's more just open enrollment.
But there does seem to be a number of studies talking about missing students that between the ages of like 16 and 21, estimates are as high as 20% of the students don't show up either in high school or college or at work at all. And I'm just wondering, at what point do we factor that in, and are they going to be coming back? And it may be something to have a longer term discussion with the school district along with probably SUNY, on what are we going to do with this group of students who sort of don't exist anywhere and eventually are going to have to come back if they're going to be productive members of society.
That's what I was driving at.
Yeah.
Well, and my version of that was just a matter of total teacher FTE is rock steady across 18 years in spite of 24% fewer students in the classrooms. So this has always been confounding for me. So I'm really interested in these numbers in terms of a structural deficit, that is to say, overstaffed. That's not the word they would use. Overstaffed from my point of view, my limited point of view, and the resulting budgetary pressure. But I'll wait until we have the hard numbers on how many are actually in the classroom.
I would only add that the estimation of teachers is probably going to be necessary to begin to address, excuse me, the precipitous drop in learning that occurred over the last 2 years, particularly among lower income students.
If that were true,
maximize and reduce the number of teachers at this point would be, it seems to me, a big mistake, particularly since we don't really know exactly what the deficit in learning has been over these couple of years, except that particularly the learning that was done online was compromised by the lack of internet access. So I think in addition to talking with them about this, it would be useful to begin to understand the effects of the pandemic and what they plan to do about it. In
addressing
terms of
the learning gap.
learning and also student attendance and also suspensions.
Chairman Olson, would it be a good idea of maybe having some subgroup of the board maybe work on some of these bigger issues? I think it's a little bit different than what we normally do when we're now talking about some of the social and economic issues and trying to get to them. I know, over time, you've had a lot to say about a lot of these issues and making sure that the school district is prepared to take on particularly some of the students from poor families or students that are in poverty. And maybe we could have a discussion away from our normal meetings to try to talk through some of this in a much more enlightened way.
Be very useful, I think. I continue to be troubled by to me, you can't look at the effectiveness of school spending solely in terms of surplus funds, and that is because we're at a very difficult time in the school district's history, it seems to me, with uncertain but probably drastic negative effects over the past couple of years on overall enrollment and overall student learning, and whether or not these deficits tend to fall within certain areas of the student population, especially the lower income area. So I would welcome that. I think it would be very useful, because if they're not addressing that, they're not spending their money very effectively, is I guess where I come from on this issue. I think it is important, and as I've said in the past, we do have the ability to publicly ventilate some of these issues for the general public, beyond the reports of the school district. So Fred, I would welcome the suggestion that we put together.
And I would be willing to work on this issue too, and start to pull some other numbers and look at some of the bed data projections and what's going on. Yeah,
I think that'd be an enormous assist to this board in terms of its effective oversight of the budget that the district has. I'd also be remiss if I'd didn't refer to the fact that we're once again in a very tumultuous labor management relations with respect to the single most important union in the district, which is the teachers union. And it's disturbing to see that there are already motions for lack of confidence and clearly significant differences between what the teachers believe to be appropriate and what the district is offering.
I agree.
Any other questions or comments? I think I find myself in the dark about a lot of this in terms of the actual negative effects of the past couple of years. It's difficult to know how effectively they're using their budget until we know how much they have to address. And certainly given the deficit in student learning that is anticipated, concluding negotiations with the teachers seems very important to begin to address it so that the issues begin to shift from salary and benefit issues for teachers to actual addressing the deficit that occurred. Any other comments or suggestions? Do we need a motion for that, Fred, or you think we can just do it?
I think that's up to Jeanette. If she wants to
Okay.
call a subcommittee, that's fine. If we need a motion, I'm more than willing to make that motion.
Why don't you make a motion to have Jeanette name a committee that would look into this?
I will move that the executive director poll the members of the BFSA for a subcommittee to look into the issues with the school district, particularly with respect to learning deficits and enrollment.
I'll second that.
And staffing.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Fred. Any other questions or comments? Okay. We will now move to a Bureau item, which is a review of the first quarter report. We have two items on the agenda for the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, which is the review of the 2022 financial statements and the staff report on the first quarter. The BFSA analysis on the first quarter is included under tab 6. Bryce will discuss these items with us.
Good afternoon. We'll begin with the analysis on the Bureau financial statements. As of June 30th, 2022, total Bureau fund balance was 9.7 million. 8.8 million of that was in the general fund. Non-major funds comprised 800,000 of that. Under the general fund, 5.6 million of that is unassigned fund balance. The next chart here compares total expenditures for fiscal year 21 compared to fiscal year 2022. As you can see, it was a $3.9 million increase at the fund level in expenditures. Largest component of that is the federal grant expenditures that were at 54.1 million for this year. Majority of that Section 8 housing at 39.2, followed by CDBG expenditures at 6.4 million. CDBG CV, that's the CARES Act funding that was provided to Bureau at 3.2 million, and then the home program at 4.1 million. And then last year's results are below those numbers. This here is a comparison of the major funds, revenues and expenditures reported on by Bureau. So you see the general funds, community development block grant, the community development block grant, COVID, CARES Act allocation, Section 8 housing, the home program, as well as total non-major funds. So year to year, total revenues increased by 1.3 million. Total expenditures increased by $4 million, and net change in fund balance was approximately $81,000. As I mentioned, federal grant revenues increased by 3.1 million. 1.9 million of that was for the CARES Act CDBG funds. Another significant increase was the home program income program, which increased $1.3 million. There was a year-to-year decrease in collection of program loans of 500,000. CDBG decreased by 533,700. And all other program loan collections were a net increase of 51,000. And there was a net decrease of 100,000 in public service and human service programs. Year to year, there was an increase of 1.3 million in rehabilitation and preservation activities. That includes 1.3 million for the home programs. CDBG and general fund expenditures decreased by 100,000, and then all other non-major funds increased by offsetting 129,000. There was a year-to-year increase of 2.7 million for planning, management, administration, and economic development activities. This is the Bureau's OPEB chart. You'll notice that there was a significant decrease for fiscal years ending 21 and 22. This is attributed to a restatement. During the audit process, the auditors identified some errors with the data sets being utilized by the actuary that conducts the OPEB valuation. Those data sets were corrected, new ones were submitted, and that's why you see a significant decrease in Bureau's current OPEB liability. Year to year from 9.7 million down to 8.8 million. As I just discussed, current year findings include the restatement of OPEB liability. It was considered a significant reporting error. Comments and recommendations of a formalized written policies for Bureau include a formalized loan write-off procedures, also financial accounting system capabilities, as well as a policy on compensated absences. Bureau should also have an annual review user access authority to the accounting system. As recently terminated employees still had user access to the system. However, being outside the city, they did not have VPN authority to connect to the system. That brings me to the end of the financial statements. Just a few brief comments on Bureau's first quarter. This slide here is just the program year 48 entitlement fund allocation. Total 19.3 was awarded to the city of Buffalo from HUD. 10.7 million will be utilized by Bureau. The remaining balance, 8.5, is going to be used by the city of Buffalo. At the end of the year, revenues are approximately equal expenditures. At the end of the first quarter, there's a variance of 2.8 million. Year to date, 3.3 million has been expended through September 30th. The year 48 entitlement funds I just mentioned are expected to be released sometime this month. It usually occurs middle to the end of December. So through the first quarter, Bureau really relies on the prior year funds that were authorized. As of September 30th, 28 out of 41 positions were filled, so vacancy rate of 13%. Salaries and fringe benefits total 800,000 at the end of the first quarter, so that's a favorable variance of 100,000. Bureau has received significant additional federal funds, including the Community Development Block Grant COVID funds, the CARES Act funds. They also receiving a large allocation from the city of Buffalo of their ARPA federal funds. And they also received from the federal government the lead hazard remediation funds. Some other programs that Bureau looked for in the private sector, nonprofit sector for additional resources include Cities Rise, LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and Evans Banks. Those are current resources they have. This chart here compares budget to actual for revenues and expenditures. So at the end of the first quarter, actual revenues were below budget at 2.3 million. Actual expenditures were below budget at 2.8 million for a total of 3.3 million in expenditures. A lot of this is timing related, as Bureau is dependent on subcontractors and partners to file the reimbursement form request. So if material wasn't submitted in a timely manner throughout the first quarter, you'll end up seeing in the second quarter. Bureau has, due to the vacancies, having a little timing issue there as well in moving projects forward. I know they're actively seeking at filling those positions to work with the community partners. That brings me to the end of my presentation on Bureau.
I can only note that their importance has never been greater in terms of the cost of rental and other housing in the city. So operating at full capacity in terms of budget and employees seems important at this time. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Now we're going to move on to the Housing Authority item. We have one item on the agenda for the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority, which is a staff report on the first quarter. The BFA's analysis of this item is included under tab 7. The BFSA, the BMHA historical issues financial statement in quarter 4, and Nathan will discuss the first quarter results with us.
Good afternoon again. The following is a review of the BMHA's fiscal year 2022-23 first quarter financial results. Having trouble with the share screen again. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
I'm not able. There we go. It's stuck for a couple. Now it's moving on. So I'll go forward. The first thing we wanted to talk about a BFSA finding that comes from the adopted budget and financial plan review. The finding was that the Marine Drive adopted budget and financial plan was not balanced. A 4-year deficit of $1 million was projected within the financial plan, with a $1.8 million total cash outflow projected over the same time. That's after factoring in the non-operational debt service payment and removing the non-cash OPEB payment. BMHA's response to this deficit was twofold. Firstly, they applied to the New York State Homes and Community Renewal to increase Marine Drive's flat rents, and estimated that would yield an additional $250,000 in annual dwelling income. This is pending approval right now, and BMHA recently reported that the targeted implementation would be in April of 2023. So it would have a minimum impact on the current fiscal year because of its late implementation, but that is the date that they've given that this could go live. The second item would be to designate somewhere north of 200 apartments as project-based housing voucher units at Marine Drive. And this would potentially yield an additional $800,000 annually. This is also pending approval. And what this would allow Marine Drive, would allow BMHA to do would be to designate these specific units as, like I said, as project-based housing units. And they could charge a market rate for those units, which would be funded via Section 8 vouchers. So it would be an expense to Section 8, and the revenue would be going instead of to another unit, a privately owned unit potentially, to Marine Drive apartments. So it's not additional voucher dollars, but a redirection of the current voucher dollars into another budget of BMHA. And it, as I said, it could yield up to $800,000 annually for that facility. BFSA previously had a recommendation that BMHA prepare a contingency plan to reduce costs wherever possible, in the event that the actual losses create the need to implement revised operating program. If the state doesn't approve these items, a plan will need to be developed. So if those do not get approved, then the deficit could materialize and they would need to develop an additional plan. On the top here is a table just summarizing where Marine Drive's budget is at budget to date versus actual. And right now there is an unfavorable variance with total revenues. This is because revenues come mostly from dwelling income. That's where this variance is from. So expenses were about where they were, expected to be, and there is the variance within revenues. So to take a look at BMHA's budget as a whole, these are the consolidated 2022-23 revenues. Overall, the actual revenues exceeded budgeted revenues by about $200,000 at September 30th. I did just mention that dwelling income was under budget at Marine Drive. Overall, it exceeded budget by $400,000, and that's specifically due to the separate asset management program rental income, which was over budget by about $500,000. So the net on a consolidated basis was $400,000. You also see that Section 8 vouchers exceeded the budget by about $300,000 based on actual housing choice vouchers or the grant dollars received by the Section 8 fund. It was offset by some, by about $500,000 in all other revenues, and then the transfers from the capital grants. This table shows the consolidated expenses. Overall, it was about $500,000 less than the budget today at $12.5 million. There's different variances, both favorable and unfavorable. Significantly, what was going on was that because BMHA does have a current vacancy rate, there were some employee compensation and employee benefit variances because they're not fully filled, and so that was the large driving force behind a lot of this. Some of the other things were, like maintenance, were contractual based, and merely not indicative of anything that you would see at fiscal year end yet, but based simply on payments to vendors. As mentioned, there is a vacancy rate. This is within historical levels. Historically, BMHA has anywhere from 10 to 25% vacancy rate. It's been lower than this in previous fiscal years or recent fiscal years. This is somewhat higher than what I've seen, but right now they have about 30 vacant positions, mostly within the asset management positions, and about 18% overall. And so just to conclude, we went through the revenues. BFSA believes that the rental receipts were potentially under budgeted rather. This is oddly enough, this is the first fiscal year since 2018-19 where part of the year was not impacted by a governmentally imposed eviction moratorium. And so the idea is that because they're over by so much now that perhaps the budget was initially very conservatively based, and that because of the impacts of the last few years. Expenses were favorable overall as well. One item is the utilities were over budget today by about $100,000. It's not significant overall, but because it's early in the fiscal year and we don't know what's going to happen in the winter, it could be more significant based on how bad the weather gets. And so just to conclude, the BMHA has taken the steps to address the structural deficits within the Marine Drive adopted budget and financial plan. The planned rental increases at Marine Drive apartments are anticipated to begin in April of 2023. The action would have a minimal impact on the current fiscal year, but would have a run rate of $250,000 annually thereafter. BMHA is actively working to identify Marine Drive tenants who are eligible for the project-based Section 8 housing choice vouchers. BMHA estimated that this action would increase Marine Drive rental receipts by up to $800,000. The impacts of these two combined actions would be sufficient to address the annual structural deficits within Marine Drive's budget and financial plan if actualized at the projected amounts. And that concludes my brief summary of the first quarter results. Were there any questions?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you, Nathan. This concludes the business portion of our meeting. I'll now open the floor to anyone from the public who would like to address the board on matters discussed today. Nikita, is there anyone in the waiting rooms to be let in? Nope.
There
Okay.
is not.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other new business to address? Hearing none, this concludes this meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. I'll move to adjourn by acclamation.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everybody. Have a happy holiday.
You too.
I have.
Everyone, happy holidays.